This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.
This episode is brought to you by Cornell Studio Supply, located in the gem city of Dayton, Ohio. Find all your pottery and ceramic sculpture equipment and supplies with the best customer service and world-class workshops. Join us January 16th through the 18th, 2026 for a colored clay and material inclusion workshop with Chris Alvashir and Jillian Park. Visit cornellstudiosupply.com to sign up. Cornell Studio Supply, owned and operated for potters by potters.
This episode is sponsored by Monkey Stuff. Monkey Stuff makes things for makers. We're inspired every day by the craft and creativity of makers and design and manufacture tools and accessories to try to make your making life a bit more delightful. Our products are designed in California, by makers and for makers, and manufactured in the USA. Check out our line of pottery accessories and tools at monkeystuff.com. Follow us on Instagram to see what we're up to in our studios, and keep on making great things.
Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 559 of the podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. Today I'm joined by Wayne Higby and Benjamin Evans, who co-curated the retrospective History, a Legacy in Motion. That showcases 26 artists that have taught ceramics at Alfred University since its founding in 1900. In our interview, we talk about Charles Benz and the early days of the school, as well as the contributions that the school and its faculty have made to the development of studio ceramics in America. Higby has been on the show before, so if you'd like to hear an in-depth look into his career, you can check out the episode from 2019. He taught ceramics at Alfred for more than 4 decades and was the Director and Principal Curator of the Alfred Ceramic Art Museum, which was completed in 2014 in its new location. Evans now directs the museum, which fulfills its mission through rotating exhibitions and stewardship of a vast ceramic collection. If you'd like to find out more, you can check out ceramicsmuseum.alfred.edu. Before we get to that interview, I wanted to mention that I will be serving as the juror for the 16th annual Workhouse Clay International Exhibition. The show highlights functional and sculptural ceramic art being created throughout the U.S. and abroad. So to be considered, please submit your entry before January the 11th. Also wanted to mention that I am having my annual holiday sale at the moment. I'm excited with the direction that this work is going, so I hope you'll check it out. The website for that is carterpottery.com. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview. I thought we would start just by having you introduce yourselves so that people can associate the voice with the name. So I'm going to have you start, Wayne.
My name is Wayne Higby, and I'm recently retired from Alfred University after 52 years. So I've retired from my teaching role. I was professor of ceramic art here at Alfred, and also the director of the Ceramic Art Museum. And fortunately, after a 2-year search, I was able to find someone that could take over the directorship of the museum. And he's sitting here with us today, which is great because he's amazing. And that's Ben Evans. And now he can introduce himself.
Okay. Thank you, Wayne. Yes. I am Benjamin Evans. and I am now the official Wayne Higby Director and Principal Curator of the Alfred Ceramic Art Museum. But when this exhibition began, I was the Assistant Director and sort of co-curator of the program.
So I thought we would start talking about the history of the program. A lot of people know the name Alfred, but the farther back in history you go, it gets a little murky. So can one of you talk about the founding of the program by Benz back in 1900?
My understanding, and maybe Wayne can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that in 1900, Alfred University, such as it was, I won't go back into the whole founding of Alfred unless you really want me to, but Alfred University was kind of falling on hard times, and enrollment was not, things were not as ideal as they could be. So there was a plan conceived to sort of a public-private partnership to join forces. The state had this great idea to create a ceramics school here, probably largely because of the Alfred's tradition as a ceramic fabrication place, even as early on as that. And so they created the New York State College of Clay Working and Ceramics, I think that's what it was originally called. And the idea, I mean, in 1900, there really wasn't the American ceramic industry just basically didn't exist. And in a kind of almost sort of Trumpian sense, there was an impulse to start making things locally, like buy American. We need to stop importing everything from Europe. And so how do we do that? Well, we need to start creating our own industry. And in order to do that, we need to train people. And in order to do that, we need a school. Hence the New York State College of Clay Working. And originally it was intended to be, well, and it wasn't a fine art institution. It was everything to do with clay, with ceramics. It was industry, it was science, it was pottery, it was the whole nine yards. And then over time, that slowly started to sort of break down into its respective disciplines.
Just to follow up with that, there was in the town of Alfred a Celadon ceramic factory. It was called the Celadon Factory, which I can explain that, but they made earthenware tile. So when you drive into Alfred, you might notice roof tile all over the town of Alfred that was made in the Celadon roof tile factory. So there was already production here, and because of the landscape and the geology of Alfred, there was clay in the ground here. And so that was part of how that, got started. I think that business and the owner of that business, whose name I don't recall at the moment, was instrumental in some way in getting the regents of New York State University to join up with Alfred University and creating this program. And then the search was on, to find someone who could be head of the program. And Charles Fergus Binns, happened to already be in the US working. His family, his father was the director of the Worcester Pottery Works in England. And I think Ben is better at this than I am. He did this wonderful deep dive on the details of the bios. But there were maybe 7 children in the family. In any case, Binns worked with his father at the Worcester Pottery Works. So he knew what it took to deal with ceramic materials. And as you know, that can change from year to year, or month to month. If you're digging kaolin from a certain site and then you have run out of that kaolin at that site and you move 6 feet over, then you have to recalibrate everything. So Binns knew all of the technical side of the ceramic industry, which put him in a kind of catbird seat working here. He was involved with the American Ceramic Society to some degree. And he was invited to come to Alfred and be the first director of this program. And it's interesting, it was called this New York State College of Clay Working and Ceramics. And I always thought that was pretty interesting. I've always identified with the clay working side because as an artist who works in ceramics, I thought, yeah, clay working, but it doesn't sound very academic. It sounds like, what? They're training workers. So maybe the ceramic part was just to sort of, kind of dice it up a little bit. And so that also rings true in the sense that when Binns came, the school began to evolve as an art program, but also as an engineering program or a science of ceramics kind of program. And he was the one who created that bifurcation in the sense that he was a potter and he made pots. And thinking back to his life growing up, it was during the arts and crafts movement in England. So he grew up within the frame of the arts and crafts movement and all the narratives and the dialogues surrounding that. And the idea of industry wasn't so much being against the machine, it was to be more in charge of the machine as a kind of notion in the arts and crafts movement. But also, interestingly enough, Binns's work has always had a certain Chinese aspect, a certain classic sort of looking at Qing or late, or early Ming things. And the arts and crafts leadership was very interested in Chinese ceramics because of the way they were made. They were all made in Chinese industry at the time by hand. Everything was done by hand. So that sort of fit the kind of philosophical idea of the arts and crafts movement. And I've just speculated that Binns, began to appreciate something about that and looked at the Chinese examples, and that hint of Chinese aesthetic that's in his work is kind of derived from that. I don't think that he spent a lot of time in China or Jingdezhen or somewhere like that. He was grew up in that arts and crafts frame. And then when he came here, he had all of the people who came to study make pots and also learn all of the technical data that was required for clay bodies and glazes. And he became quite famous for his own glazes in particular. So you can see how the pottery sort of art school element is coming along. And then you can see how the science side begins to grow out of, well, I know how to make bricks. I know how to brick America. Bricking of America was kind of a slogan for brick roads and that kind of birth of industry and the American psyche and, being more involved in the production and the mechanization of what the industrial age meant.
So if you were a student at Alfred in, say, 1905, so the program had already been established, it had gotten going, what do you think the students were experiencing in those first 10 years? Like, what was the pedagogy? How were they being taught?
I think they were being taught to make pots, and they were taught, to take classes in the technical side of how to come up with the clay bodies and the materials. But it wasn't just that. I think there was a lot of technical information about firing. And eventually, of course, he becomes known as the father of studio pottery in America, American studio pottery, because he provided the information and he wrote a book, maybe Ben can recall.
The Potter's Craft.
The Potter's Craft, very early. And that laid the groundwork for everyone, gradually to build kilns in their backyards and to, for Amico to have glazes.
I want to jump in there too. There's two other figures that need to be recognized, and that's Marion Fosdick and Clara Catherine Nelson. Fosdick was originally hired by Binns to come and teach painting and drawing, because that was also an integral part of the ceramic production. But she got so good at making ceramics that she couldn't continue to teach painting and drawing. She started teaching in the ceramics sort of area. And so they had to hire somebody else. And that's where Clara Catherine Nelson came in. And those three, like Binns we have, a big collection of Binns pots, and in the exhibition, he kind of gets the big room and so on and so forth. But from what I understand, it was really those three that kind of determined the curriculum that was to set the template for the study of ceramics for, a significant period of time, at least until the war. And the Potter's Craft came out in 1910. So, it was a significant legacy that those three created and left behind.
I think about what it would have been like to be an artist trying to set out on your own, to not only make the work, but fire the work. Like you said, that Binns in that cohort of teachers were teaching people how to fire. The first accessible electric kilns were developed, I believe, by Pewabic, which was Mary Chase
Stratton.
Yes.
Mary Chase Stratton.
Yes. And they were developing electric kilns in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Mm-hmm. So before that, you couldn't really go out and buy an electric kiln because there just were no electric kilns. Mm-hmm. So it's so interesting to me to think about Alfred as both a remnant of technological advance and also a driver of technological advances. So can you all talk us through, there's a couple generations in there before we get to the war, because that was like a very definitive turning point. So what was the second generation of Alfred teachers?
Well, I don't know quite what your chronology, how your chronology lines up. I think of the next generation as actually coming kind of post-war, because I'm thinking about Daniel Rhodes and
right, because that's
Randall.
50s. Yep.
Right. So Daniel Rhodes was the first person to graduate from the MFA program here. It was the launch of the MFA program was, let's see if I've got it written down here, 1943. That's kind of an interesting, how did they manage to launch that at that time? I would have thought it would have taken place after. Anyway, nearly the end of the war. So yeah, Rhodes and Randall and Cushing and Bob Turner, William Perry, like those were, that's what I see as the next generation.
There seems to be a big gap, like between literally 1900 and the late 40s, 50s. But what's interesting is there are these very famous names in Alfred history that are often the names of the buildings. So like Harder Hall.
Yes.
I know that they're there, but I'm sure there had to have been other people around. And this is kind of a historical question in general. How did y'all choose who to focus on in this history?
The exhibition, basically beyond the centerpiece, which is Binns, is focused on the players who kind of gave the school its face, in the sense that the renowned, quote unquote, nature of the school. So that's a lineage of folks. At the same time, of course, these things don't exist in a vacuum. So they're technicians and they're, unsung heroes, who are building kilns and following, everyone's specs for those kinds of things that built the program, and then for us, for Ben and myself, it was a difficult call when you say, we're going to do 125 years of ceramics. And then you're going to, how do you play out that whole picture? So it was nigh unto impossible to play that whole history out in detail, but to focus on the the people who had a kind of presence, in the story, and were the faculty by and large of the school. And the legacy in motion idea was simply that there's a legacy that's been built on the early days of Alfred and continued, on into this day. And so there's still new faculty here in the programs. And that means the legacy is still in motion, whatever it is. And so we were playing around with different titles and trying to come up with a way to talk about that. So the most recent faculty are also in the show. But to answer your question, I think, people came to Alfred in the summertime. And so we have a legacy of people. Ben started a kind of summer program. And so Adelaide Robineau, who's, of course, the most famous, perhaps because of her Scarab vase and all of that, she was here. She studied with him. She learned more about kilns and that kind of thing. But there was certainly the American arts and crafts movement. So, there's a wonderful history there of mostly women artists who were working in ceramics. And they were bringing in, at Rookwood or these various different companies. I think the Americans had a slightly different idea about arts and crafts. I think it was more like make beautiful things and sell them for a decent amount of money. It's sort of the American way.
Not much has changed.
Laying down a foundation of that kind. Mary Longworth Nichols, and people who started these were involved in these potteries, and mostly that history is in a foundation way in this country about women artists. And you mentioned the Pewabic pottery connection in Stratton and all that. Binns was conversant with that group of people, and they were coming to him for technical, questions and advice. But also, gradually, the person who became the chief sort of faculty member was Charles Harder. And Charles Harder studied in Chicago. He had a degree also in art education and in teaching. And he was very interested in design for industry. So the program that matches up with Binns, he was here, I think he retired after 31 years. And Harder was here at the end of his tenure. And he was kind of anointed, as a person to move things forward. And he was, at the time, of course, it seems logical that design for industry would be the kind of cornerstone of the thinking. Later, that was reinforced by the collapse of the Bauhaus in Germany, at the beginning of probably 1933, at the beginning of the Hitler's rise to power. And then Harder hired, say, for instance, there was a gentleman here named Schreckengoss, Don Schreckengoss, I think. So Ben has to follow up on this. But he was also a member of a family called Schreckengoss family, and there were three people in ceramics from his family. But he came here and worked with Charles Harder. And they actually, one of the pieces in the show is a collaborative piece they did together. But also, Schreckengoss designed things for industry. There's a wonderful cup and saucer set in the exhibition that's Art Deco, because the Art Deco movement was sort of in the picture by then. At the end of, the arts and crafts, we get Art Nouveau. And then Art Nouveau kind of decamps to Art Deco. And so these things were flowing through the system here. and they were being acknowledged and looked at. And so Val then became a student, he and Bob Turner, and they originally designed work for industry. That's what they did. Ted Randall joined a little bit later. He was educated at Yale as a sculptor, but his family was very involved in ceramics. They published, I think, a technical ceramic industry magazine. Anyway, he was the person who finally shifted the whole pedagogy of the school into the arts in general. Theodore Randall, who also was the founder, technically the founder of NCECA. And the first presidents of NCECA were William Perry and Bob Turner, and later on Val. So there was a connection to that picture that was also associated with Alfred. So you can begin to see how Alfred had a kind of legacy building throughout Binz's tenure, and then Charles Harder, and then the other faculty who came to study and stuck around to teach afterwards. So you'll see all of that work in the exhibition by all of those people, and early work as well as later work by each one of those artists.
That's a very comprehensive answer. I can just chip in a tiny bit. You're quite right. There is a bit of a space there, but you have to also remember how long people stayed at Alfred. I mean, almost everybody was, Wayne included, right? I mean, I don't know what it is about this place, but there's something in the water, with maybe 3 or 4 exceptions. And these are people that left within, 3 or 4 years. Almost everybody stayed for 30 plus years.
It's the students, Ben. It's the students.
Right. Right. Maybe it is. Yeah.
You just want to be where there's a sense that people are coming to study ceramics. And if you're a ceramic artist, you're so many gifted, amazing young artists that I had the pleasure of working with. And I think Val and Bob and Ted, everyone would say the same thing. Why would we go somewhere else? Who's the next brilliant human being that you're going to meet and be able to work with?
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art. The collection exists as an online resource for research and inspiration, featuring photos of over 4,000 objects made by over 1,000 artists. The images are high quality and can be used with no permission required, making them a great resource for students and teachers. To find out more, visit rosenfieldcollection.com. I think about the impact of the graduate program because I actually found out about Alfred not from its history, but because my teachers went to Alfred. So there is this long history of Alfred producing MFA students that then go out and teach at often very small colleges in the middle of nowhere. But then they carry on kind of an Alfred tradition that then takes it to the next generation and it spreads out. Can you all talk about the MFA program and just this idea of being an incubator for ceramic education that then gets dispersed out across the United States?
Well, I guess that's, my background, because, I originally came at the invitation of Ted and Bob and Val to join the faculty to teach, undergrad and graduate students. So most of my career of those 52 years were involved in, teaching in the program and helping work with them to create the program. Val picked up on running a summer school, which was something that Binz had done to some degree. And that summer school became very, very popular. And so high school art teachers would come to the summer school program, and then they would go back to their schools and they would talk to the students about, you want to go study ceramics, you have to go to Alfred. So, you know, there was a reciprocal thing between high school teachers and then, you know, students who came to Alfred, and then the students graduating from that program, the MFA program in particular, and then going out, as you say, and teaching in all kinds of places, well, wherever there was a job, you know, and then moving through the system from job to, you know, advance their own careers in whatever way that seemed appropriate. You know, it's just a wonderful place to be, because all of those students were hungry and interested and wanting to know more about ceramics, and it became more and more popular. One interesting detail to this, it's fascinating, I think, because they both involve the Bauhaus and the importance of the Bauhaus. So I mentioned it just briefly earlier because of its connection to design and the ceramics. So Margaret Wildenhain immigrated from Germany to this country. It's a functional potter, very, very important impact on pottery in the sense of functionality and design. And then Harder being very interested in, you know, utopian design. Eva Zeisel, who was part of that picture. You know, the Museum of Modern Art collects design. They don't collect handmade objects. So you can sense that there's even a kind of ideal about things designed, you know, emphasizing that word, and designed for industry. So that was something that Harder also you know, built on. And he went back to Chicago when Moholy-Nagy and others had moved there from the Bauhaus, and brought even more of that idea into the fold here, working with Val, working with Bob Turner, etc. But the curious thing is that the other connection to the Bauhaus is when the Bauhaus moved to Black Mountain College. And when Black Mountain College was originated, and this is probably later with Albers and Annie Albers, the fiber artist, Joseph Albers, the painter, it was a mecca for artists, although Bob Turner was the first person to build a kiln there. After he graduated in 1949, he went to Black Mountain to build the kiln. And Hamida worked there briefly, Karen Carnes worked there, but also William de Kooning, you know, the art world from New York was there. And who arrives at that point? Peter Volkas. So then we have Peter Volkas and the ceramic revolution, you know, because he's now connected to, wait a minute, it's not all about craft and design. It's about the art world. I'm going to go talk to William de Kooning or whoever he's talking to. And then there became this kind of slightly misnomer called abstract expressionist ceramics. But the important thing is that both of those connections were Bauhaus instilled connections, the art side and the design side. And so for a period, Alfred sort of was the technical design thing, and the West Coast, where Volkas was the art thing. And that became a very interesting conversation and kind of competitive environment in which the new students who started arriving at Alfred were involved in. You know, Ken Price came to Alfred because he wanted to learn about making glaze. He wanted to learn how to make ceramics. And then later on, of course, his career tops out. He's the most important ceramic artist, you know, in the US, maybe at the moment, if you go by auction prices or whatever you go by. And he had the retrospective at the Met. But he came to grab onto that information. And, but still, Alfred would say, oh, Ken Price graduated from Alfred. Oh, okay. Along with Betty Woodman, who studied here when we had the School for American Craftsmen. She studied for 2 years and got a certificate from Alfred University. That's her 2 years of study were here at the school with the School for American Craftsmen. So the threads are pretty interesting, and you start to try to weave them together to create the picture that we're talking about now.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that your question just goes to show how successful that initial idea was. So in 1900, we want to have American ceramics. What do we do? And let's get somebody in, well, that'll teach and that'll spread, and then the ripple effects will kind of go out across the country. And that's exactly what happened. And it happened in a really wonderful way in which totally unanticipated divisions and, history intervened, and different ideas kind of percolated in different areas, and design mixed with art, mixed with, industry, all of these kinds of things kind of took their own, and the engineering side as well. But it was kind of a real wonderful flowering that occurred because of that one idea. I mean, we can't take all of the credit for everything, but there is.
Well, we could try.
It's not no. Well, I mean, it's not totally an exaggeration to for us to be sort of tooting our own horn over here.
I think good ideas and good technique are easy to spread because they take on a life of their own. That almost, if you can introduce people into a certain style of firing, like say raku, Wayne, with the work that you did with raku for years, raku as a process seduced people. Like all you had to do is show it to them.
Yeah, that's true.
Completely agree. Seducing me right now.
That's true. That's true. That's true.
Well, I have a curatorial question for you, Ben. I'm thinking about all of the people in this show. And a lot of the people, like let's say Ben's, there's a large circular room with quite a bit of work of his, the most that I'd ever seen. I actually really love that part of the video, watching that, because I know his name, but I didn't really know his work. But then there's people like Paul Briggs, who's a relatively new professor in the history of Alfred. But the work you're showing of his is different. Like the bodies of work between the objects are different. And I think it can be really hard to sum up someone's career or their thoughts on art with a couple objects. So can you talk about, as you're putting this together, how do you actually do it? Like you've got the players, you know who you want to represent, but how do you then pick the objects to show the breadth of their work?
In a sense, the curating of this show, well, okay, so there's two different groups of people. There is the people that we could just go down into the collection and, sadly, they don't have as much of a voice. So we can kind of, but even there, my goal and my kind of influence in this sort of curatorial partnership was to try to emphasize the diversity of practice, to see that somebody is making very beautiful, functional, pristine, almost bins-like kinds of work, and then shifting, and then other ideas start to get introduced and new things start to happen. And even with somebody like Paul, we included a piece, a fairly early piece, 2001, 2001, excuse me. And it's a combination of a cathedral and a synagogue and a mosque, and that's something that he was interested in 20 years ago. But that's paired with his more recent work with knots and incredible stuff. Because for me, I was very keen to try to show the diversity of ceramic practice in general. So it starts from bins and then look at it explode into all of these different places. Now, in other cases, with some of the artists that are had a voice in all this, we'd go and do studio visits, and it was partly a question of, well, what do you want to be representing you in this context? And so we gave a lot of agency to those artists. And, so Linda Sikora wanted to put in this big table piece I don't know if that's what I kind of really liked her functional thing that we have in our collection, but she wanted to show this, and that was important for her, and so that was something we were able to sort of go with and respect the artist's agency in the show.
I think a lot about the Walter McConnell piece that's there.
Oh my gosh.
There is just, what a tour de force. I mean, his work is like that. Like, you see it and it's hard to take it in because there's so much happening. But what it does, I think, for the students, or what I hope it does for the students that are there now, is that they go and they sit with that piece and think about the history of ceramics and also think about why all those objects are there. Can you talk a little bit about that piece?
I shouldn't probably say that it's my favorite piece in the show. It's one of the pieces that I'm able to sort of access in a way that I really enjoy. I mean, again, the show is trying to showcase the diversity of ceramics. So there's a lot of, there's country music, and there's Beethoven over there, and there's a little bit of, hip hop maybe, but so, Walter's work is something that I can really dance to, and it's called A Requiem in White, and it's thus named because it's reflecting this tradition of maiolica production, when Italian, I guess the whole world was making this stuff by dunking stoneware in lead paint and then painting it. And of course, all of the people that were doing this were getting sick and were dying, or being pretty impacted by this production, and it was a real craze at the time. There was a real huge fad for this, so that middle class people, everybody could have little religious figures, or a little Dutch boy, or these kinds of figures that represented a kind of taste or class or something or other. And maybe, I don't know if it's an exaggeration, but it was one of the first times in which culture was being mass produced, where we see what Adorno calls the culture industry, kind of, it going from a handmade to an industrial sort of thing, and everybody could get one. And at the same time, this was causing, mass, considerable health impact on the people that were making it. So it's a requiem, and it's sort of put into the shape of a Buddhist stupa kind of shape. And it's white, and with these kind of rather sad blue kinds of tones that kind of come out here and there. It has this crystalline glaze that gives it an age, and there's also within that piece 3 figures that are, so all of the work in the piece is handmade. He didn't sort of find these sort of at thrift stores. He found the molds and then slip cast everything that's in there. And 3 of the pieces in that piece are in fact molds that he made himself using very high-tech methods. He had his studio assistant dress up in some, oldie-fashionedy garb and pose, and was 3D scanned, then 3D printed, then a mold of that was made, and then that was cast in the same fashion. So in my view, those are people that represent, those figures represent the people that are working on this craft, and as a sort of memorial to them. But it's also an interesting piece, even if you don't know any of that backstory, because it's very, I don't know if anybody uses the word postmodern anymore. I'm of the generation when postmodern was like a really hip term to use, and I think I'm comfortable using it. I know what I'm saying when I say that. In that, all kinds of different things are being reduced to the same level. You've got Saint Francis with a Buddha, with a Pinocchio, with an old sea shanty pirate guy, and it's just this kind of complete reduction of leveling of culture all to the same plane. It's all this stuff. It's all just the same stuff. It's all just a tchotchke to go on your shelf. And that's another kind of interesting feature of kind of cultural industry.
When you're curating a show, I really enjoyed working on this one in particular because, Ben is there, and he and I, having someone to really talk in depth about work. And he brings a breadth of knowledge, from a different place than exactly where my knowledge comes from. So that just give and take, and how we would, I know Walter's work. I've known Walter work. I was involved in hiring Walter to come to Alfred. So, and he was a graduate student here as well. So, being familiar with work is sometimes good, but sometimes a handicap. It's nice to work with someone who can open it up in different ways and talk to you about it. So that's been, part of the fun of this particular exhibition, because there's a lot of history, and some of it, I think I know about it. I've been there. But at the same time, I'm talking about it, and looking at pieces, and they all become new again. They all become present and real, all of a sudden again, and they're not just cataloged in my head in some way. The other side of curating a show, for me, is also my knowledge of the space in which the things are going to be presented. And so, I think every curator has this piece in their head. And so we're viewing, at Walter's studio, having a fabulous time. And I'm taking all these cell phone pictures of him and Ben talking intensely about all of the ideas behind the work, and I'm listening in, and then I'm thinking, we've looked at several of these pieces, the stupa pieces, and they generally are in the round, and they are 360, and they're big, and I'm going, too big for the museum right now. We're going to try to put all this other material in the museum. And so, show me that white one again, because it was a half. It was built for a show somewhere else, I think in Baltimore. What's the museum in Baltimore? But it was built and designed for a room in the museum in Baltimore. And so it was half of the piece. And I said, oh, perfect. Because it will sit exactly against the wall at the far end of the sight line as you walk in the museum. So you're looking down the sight line and you're seeing, wow, what's that? And it was like it was designed for that spot. So, that helps, because then it starts to set other things in motion about, well, if that has to go there, then this has to go here, this has to go there, and then it has to go there. And so a curatorial adventure, in part, is kind of the choreography of how you're going to introduce these pieces to people. And in some cases, things that may have been seen before, but now they're in a different location. So there are many, many, many ways to look at things and to keep them fresh. And I think partly, the fun of curating is sort of beginning to have the pieces speak out like that, and define the way they're going to connect with other pieces, and how to tell the story that we're telling. And you're right about the bins. I think that many pieces of bin ceramics haven't been out on view in years. So, the president of the university said to me one day, he said, well, I'm not even sure I know what Binns' ceramics looks like. And I said, oh, well, you're about to find out, because it's a whole centerpiece of the show is Binns, and a reevaluation to a whole new generation of artists who had no idea who, Binns was, and how they're looking at it. And to faculty, like I walked through there with Linda Sakura, and she says, oh, the glazing is amazing. Look at this, look at this, look at this. And it was such an opportunity to have that interaction with folks like her, who really know what she's looking at. And then with just a new generation of people who've never seen it, and community members who also, have heard the name Binns. Everybody in town of Alfred knows Binns, but many didn't know, well, what does the work look like that he made? So it's a wonderful exhibition for history history of the school and for refreshing a lot of points of view about that history and the work and the quality, the super quality of that work. And the timing of it seemed really excellent, because we're not looking for something in particular. We're looking at that whole kind of genre and how it's, built and moved and still in motion.
I'd like to, I don't know if you're able to get a question in edgewise here because we're just
sorry
so much, but I just wanted to pick up on something there, that one of the things that I've really enjoyed, two things I want to say about that I've really enjoyed about this show was firstly, because I'm a newcomer to Alfred, so I'm not, blessed or cursed with a deep knowledge of this whole history. So I am looking at it all from a fairly new perspective, and this was an excellent opportunity for me to really kind of, delve into some of it. I don't know how deep my dive was. It's a big story, but it was a wonderful chance to sort of get to know some of it. But one of the things I've enjoyed the most is having people coming in. We had, for example, we have an alumni weekend or whatever it is, and getting people that just came in. My office is sort of situated right, so I can kind of keep an eye on people coming in and out, and so I could kind of jump out and go into hear some of the stories of people coming through and responding to the exhibition. And we get people that were here maybe as nursing students talking about how they failed a class. There's one story this woman was telling me about a whole group. There was something like 11 out of a cohort of 30. 11 out of 30 people failed the class. This is, I think, when they were first introducing some kind of Bauhaus inspired, foundations kind of class, and 11 people failed, and she was on the verge of, dropping out. And then she did a summer class with Val Cushing to make up the credit. And that experience changed her life and made her a potter for the rest of her life. So she went on and, became a nurse and still lives, and not too far away. But, so there's these kinds of, and all kinds of stories. Meeting Wally Higgins' family was wonderful, and hearing stories about their dad. We've had some of the relatives who was here just the other day. Josh Randall was here, who's the grandson. And he was talking about stories, growing up, coming down here from Rochester on Thanksgiving or whatever, and going into his dad's kiln, which is, the size of a house, and just, all kinds of people kind of coming out of the woodwork and going on about the different generations, different encounters they had, almost all very positive, lots of stories about very kind-hearted people, very generous people. So it makes sort of sense that there is this reputation or why people stuck around for so long.
Before we conclude the remarks, I'd like to just say something about one other individual that is in the background here. But the reason we have a museum on this campus, and it was designed by famous American architect Michael McKinnell, is because of a gentleman named Marlon Miller. And Marlon is an interesting story here, which wraps things around, what Ben's maybe vision all along was. I think he had an idea there might someday be a museum. He had a study collection. But Marlon came because there was an engineering school, ceramic engineering. And he was interested in material engineering. So Alfred was on the radar as a school he might, visit. So with a couple of members of his family, he came and he visited the school. And it triggered everything that he wanted, and he studied ceramic materials. Interestingly, as he would put it, he said, the library used to close at 11. And so I just went to the pot shop because it was open all night.
Pot shop meaning something a little different now.
Yeah, it's a little different now. They closed now, but it was open. So he says it was open all night. And there he met Marcianne Maypole Miller, who later became his wife. And she was a potter. And it also turns out that Marlon's roommate, his first roommate, was a painter, was a member of the art school. And the arts, the pottery, finally Marcianne and Marlon started a collection of ceramics. I think their first piece in the collection was a purchase of Val Cushing's, and maybe mine soon after that. He later became a trustee of Alfred University, and eventually I met him many years later. But in any case, that connection between ceramic engineering and painter and pottery, and he has since then been the number one donor perhaps in Alfred's history. And he talks about his lengthy conversations with Robert Turner about the need for a ceramic art museum. And he collected the work from Robert Turner's last kill. One of the pieces from that kill is on the cover of a book that we did of Marlon's collection called Materiality. Fabulous book because all the photography is by Brian Oglesby, one of the greatest photographers of all time from my point of view. How to make ceramics look just the way it should in a flat format. In any case, Marlon at one point decided that he wanted just to build the museum. And so the fact that we have this exhibition in this building designed by a famous American architect is entirely due to the fact that Marlon Miller had these connections to the school and to his wife and their starting of a pottery collection and ceramic collection and his undying interest in that legacy. The collection is eventually coming to Alfred as his final gift, I suppose, in one sense. That collection is, Lucy Rhee, Hans Koper, name of famous artists, Japanese or Chinese or American or English or European, and it's in the collection. So in the near future, at some point, the museum will increase its holdings to something that would really match a kind of state of ceramic art than anywhere else in the world. So maybe that sounds like a commercial, I don't know, but it's not meant to sound like a commercial so much as it's a celebration of a gentleman whose vision has pulled all of this effort together and this legacy, and his attentiveness to that and his interest in that has allowed us to really dig deeper into this history that we're now trying to put on view.
Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up. I wanted to thank you both for doing this today, and also wanted, Ben, if you could just plug the website so that people could find out more about the exhibition.
Absolutely, yes. Our website is ceramicsmuseum.alfred.edu, and from there you can very easily navigate to the exhibitions page. And I'm pleased to announce, although I suppose if I announce it, then I have to do it. We're hoping that we're going to be able to create a virtual tour of the museum. We've just ordered the special 360 camera, and there should be some a virtual tour that people can go on and see the show for forever once we get that up. I guess I would just like to add something by way of a coda. We've talked a lot about, we've talked a little about some of the players of previous generations. And I think it's just important to recognize the artists who are here today, teaching and carrying on and moving and changing this Alfred's legacy. Because one of the things that I think the show really documents and celebrates, it shows the history and the changing of ceramics, but it also just shows an incredible diversity. So now we've got Nikki Green, Stephanie Haynes, Paul Briggs, who I've mentioned, Jason Green, wonderful artist, Linda Sikora is still here, Matt Kelleher. And these are all, when you see them in the context of the rest of this, there is a kind of trajectory, like or a delta that kind of splits, or maybe even more like a firework kind of going off. And these are sparks that are kind of radiating out in new directions. And I think that it is easy for us, for places like ours that have an important historical connection, to sort of spend quite a bit of time looking backwards. And Matt Kelleher said we were doing these artist talks during this series, and he made an important and interesting point, and that's to say that, Alfred's best years are likely in the future. So, it's important to recognize our history and to think about, how we kind of got here, but it's also just really important to acknowledge that it's still, I think the rankings, I don't know, I read in some newspaper, an Alfred newspaper, so maybe it's not right, but I think that this is still, like, in the ranking system, however that works, this is still the best ceramics program in the country, and with very good reason. The people that are here, the dedication to education. These are not people that kind of clock out when the class is over. They're just at it 24/7, and the students have a real sense of community. So it's just I guess with all of this talk of legacy, we want to make sure that we emphasize as well the in motion part, and just sort of
Yeah, it also reminds me to say that there are a lot of international students. We just finished an exhibition prior to this one, featuring Li Hanwei, a Chinese student who came in 2005 from Beijing, who's now become an international force in the world of sculpture and ceramics. So there's an international connection. And I think, apropos of what Matt said, if any of us at any point in the history have done our job right, then the future should be secure in some way, as long as they can keep raising the money to run this place, because it's a very costly operation. That kill room is like, there's no other kill room in the world like that. But it is something of an investment always. So, but we just keep reinvesting in our legacy and our history. And the new faculty are all a part of that. They're wonderful artists, and they have all kinds of ideas. I'm going, what? Oh, okay, yes, exactly. So it's fabulous. Great place. And we're so happy that Ben has joined the team, so to speak.
Well, great. Well, thank you both very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for your interest.
Thank you very much for having us. And you're going to have your work cut out editing, I think.
Yeah, that'll be a good job. But it's folks like you, of course, that help us do what we do. And we appreciate it. You're really good at what you're doing. And I know the students listen to you because they're always telling me that. So thank you.
I'd like to thank Wayne and Ben for coming on the show. It was a pleasure to hear more about this exhibition, and I encourage you to go see the Alfred Ceramic Art Museum in person. They have an amazing collection in the basement, so definitely check that out. And then there's also a new exhibition of Sharif Bey's work that's going to be opening in February of 2026. Before we go, I'd like to thank today's sponsors. That's Monkey Stuff, the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art, and Cornell Studio Supply. If your organization is interested in becoming a sponsor on the show, you can get in touch at talesofaredclayrambler.com. I'll be back in a couple weeks with another episode. Thank you all for tuning in. If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes podcasts and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.